My dad cheated on my dying mom with Michelle, kicked me out 3 months later to give my room to his stepdaughter. But mom left a will that destroyed them all. I'm 19 years old, I'm in college, and 6 months ago my mom died of cancer. And what happened after that basically made me realize that my family was never what I thought it was. The truth is, I'm still processing all of this, but I need to tell it because every time I think about it, I realize new details that I didn't see at the time. You know, things my mom was trying to tell me without saying them directly, and now it all makes sense in a way that breaks my heart but also makes me feel protected by her even after she's gone. My mom, Patricia, fought cancer for almost 2 years. It was horrible. Like one of those things you see in movies but never think will happen to you. And I went from being a normal 17-year-old student worried about exams and boys to becoming someone who knew exactly what medications her mom took and at what time, which days she had chemo, how to deal with the side effects. My dad, Christopher, was there too, or so I thought. He went to the important medical appointments, paid for everything, seemed devastated every time the doctors gave bad news. I thought we were a team, the three of us against cancer. You know what I mean? I never suspected anything weird. Never saw the signs that were probably there the whole time. The last months were the worst. Mom was at home with hospice care, basically waiting for the end, and I left college that semester to be with her. I spent hours sitting next to her bed. Sometimes we talked, sometimes we just stayed there in silence. I remember there were moments when she looked at me in a strange way, like she wanted to tell me something but couldn't or didn't know how. And I just thought it was because of the pain medications or because she was weak. Now I know she was probably trying to warn me about what was going to happen after her death. But how do you tell that to your 8-year-old daughter who's already destroyed watching you die? I guess. Mom died on a Tuesday in March. It was the worst weeks of my spaj. Life, the funeral, watching the coffin go down, all that shit that feels unreal while it's happening. My dad seemed devastated. He cried at the funeral, hugged people, said things like Patricia had been the love of his life. I was so immersed in my own pain that I didn't pay attention to other details. Like the fact that there was a woman at the funeral I didn't know. Someone named Michelle, who stayed close to my dad but not too close, like keeping herself on the margins but clearly there. After the funeral, I tried to go back to some kind of normalcy. I went back to college, tried to catch up with the classes I'd missed, but it was hard to concentrate when everything in the house reminded me of Mom. My dad didn't help much either. Honestly, he was weird. Absent. Went out a lot more than normal. And when I asked him where he'd been, he only said vague things like he needed air, or that he was with friends processing his grief. I let him be because I thought everyone has their own way of dealing with death, right? 3 months after the funeral, in June, my dad sat me down in the living room and told me he had something important to tell me. I thought maybe he was going to say he'd sell the house because it had too many memories or something like that. But no, he told me. Isabella, I met someone and we're getting married. Just like that, no preambles, no preparation. I sat there trying to process what I'd just heard, because literally 3 months had passed since we buried my mom, 90 days, and my dad was already engaged to someone else. I asked him who it was, and he said her name was Michelle, that he'd met her a few months ago, which already seemed suspicious to me, but I didn't say anything yet. That she was a wonderful woman and he was sure we'd get along. I don't know what he expected me to say. Congratulations, I'm happy for you? Because all I felt was a mix of confusion, betrayal, and disgust. I tried to be calm, told him it seemed very fast, that maybe we should take more time to process Mom's death before bringing someone new into our lives, but he just got defensive. He told me I didn't understand how lonely he felt, that he needed to move on with his life, that Mom would have wanted him to be happy. That last part made me angry because, honestly, how did he know what Mom would have wanted? And I definitely don't think Mom would have wanted her husband to remarry 3 months after her death. 2 weeks later, Michelle moved into the house with her daughter Grace, who was 17. They arrived with all their stuff, boxes and suitcases everywhere, and suddenly, the house that had been mine and my parents' my whole life was full of strange objects, clothes that weren't ours, photos of people I didn't know. Michelle tried to be nice to me at first, told me things like she hoped we could be friends, that she understood this was difficult for me, but it all sounded so fake. And Grace basically ignored me, passed by me like I was a piece of furniture, and I didn't make much effort to be nice to her either because, seriously, her mom had just destroyed what little normalcy I had left. a month after they moved in. My dad called me to his study and said we needed to talk. I already knew it wasn't going to be good news from his tone of voice. He told me Grace needed her own space, that sharing a room with her mom wasn't ideal for a girl her age, and that he'd thought maybe I could move somewhere else temporarily to give her my room. Temporarily, he said, as if that made the situation better. I asked him where I was supposed to go, and he suggested maybe with my Uncle Daniel, my mom's brother, who lived like 30 minutes away and had an extra room. Honestly, I don't know what Mom would have said if she'd been alive, and heard my dad asking me to leave my home, my room, the place where I grew up, to give space to his new wife's daughter. She probably would have yelled at him, kicked him out, something. But I just sat there, feeling like my chest was being squeezed, unable to breathe properly, thinking this couldn't really be happening. And the worst part is, my dad didn't even seem to feel bad about asking me that. He was like annoyed that I wasn't saying yes immediately, as if I was the unreasonable one in this situation. I didn't argue. I think part of me was already so exhausted from everything, from the pain over Mom, from seeing Michelle and Grace in my house, from feeling like I didn't belong there anymore, that I just said, okay, I'll leave. I called my Uncle Daniel that same night, told him what was happening, and he got furious. He told me that no way should I leave, that this was my house as much as my dad's, that this was crazy. But I'd already made the decision. A week later, I packed all my stuff while Grace watched from the door of what had been my room, probably already planning how she was going to decorate it, and I left for Uncle Daniel's house. Living with my uncle was fine. He was super cool, gave me my space, cooked, not very well, but he tried, and was clearly trying to compensate for all the mess my dad had created. But it wasn't my home, you know? And it hurt to know there was a stranger living in my room, sleeping in my bed, probably using my closet. My dad called me from time to time, short and awkward conversations where he asked how I was, and I responded with monosyllables until one of us hung up. He never asked if I could come back, never apologized for kicking me out. It was like he'd already replaced me completely, just like he'd replaced Mom. Like 2 months after moving in with my uncle, my dad called me on a Tuesday night. It was like 10 p.m., which was already weird because he almost never called me that late. He sounded nervous, upset, and started saying things like we needed to talk urgently, that a problem had come up with the house, that he needed me to come see him as soon as possible. I asked him what was going on, and he just kept saying it was complicated, that he needed to explain in person, that it was important. Something in his voice made me think this wasn't about reconciliation or missing me. There was something else, something that had him scared. The next day, I went to the house. Well, to what had been my house. Michelle opened the door with a fake smile and took me to the study where my dad was sitting with a bunch of papers on the desk. He looked terrible, like he hadn't slept, and there was an open letter in front of him. I sat down and asked him what was going on, and he basically blurted everything out at once. He told me he'd received a letter from Mom's estate attorney, that apparently Mom had made changes to her will a few weeks before she died, and that I had inherited half the house. Those words stayed floating in the air while I tried to understand them. I hadn't seen it coming at all. I never knew Mom had updated her will. We never talked about inheritances or property or anything like that because I was 18 and was more worried about taking care of her than thinking about real estate. My dad kept talking, saying this was a problem because he'd assumed the house was completely his, that he couldn't believe Mom had done this without consulting him, that we needed to find a solution. And that's when I understood it. He hadn't called me because he wanted me to come back or because he missed his daughter. And he'd called me because legally I owned half of his house, and that ruined his plans with Michelle. I told him I needed to see Mom's lawyer before making any decisions, and my dad immediately got intense, saying it wasn't necessary to involve lawyers, that we could resolve this as a family, that maybe he could buy out my share, or we could make an arrangement. Michelle was standing there, clearly listening to everything, and I could see on her face that she was furious. This wasn't part of her plan when she married my dad. She thought she was going to have a whole house, not have to deal with me and my rights to the property. I left there and went straight to Mom's lawyer's office. An older man whose name was something like Rodriguez or Ramirez, I don't remember well. He explained everything to me very patiently. Mom had updated her will 6 weeks before she died, when she was still lucid enough to make legal decisions. She had specifically left half the house in my name, with very clear instructions that this was my inheritance and that no one, including my dad, could sell it or make changes without my consent. But there was more. The lawyer told me Mom had also established a trust fund for me with Uncle Daniel as trustee, where she'd put all her personal savings, her investments, everything that was legally hers, and that I'd have access to that money when I turned 21 or earlier, if I needed to pay for college or other emergencies with Uncle Daniel's approval. I sat there in that office trying not to cry while the lawyer explained the details. My mom, in the middle of her pain, knowing she was going to die, had taken the time to protect me. She'd made sure I had a place, that I had resources, that I wouldn't be completely at my dad's mercy. And she'd done it in secret, without telling me anything. Probably because she knew I would have protested or would have thought it was morbid to talk about those things. The lawyer told me there was also a letter from Mom for me, that she'd left instructions for it to be delivered when I was informed about the inheritance. I read the letter right there in the office. It was short, written in Mom's shaky handwriting from her last days, but every word was clear. She told me she loved me, that she was sorry she couldn't be there to see me grow up, that she'd made these arrangements to ensure my future. And then there was a line that said, "Take care of yourself, Isabella, and don't let anyone make you feel like you don't deserve what's yours." That line broke me, because it was so specific. So intentional. Like Mom knew exactly what was going to happen after her death, like she'd seen the future and was trying to prepare me for it. That night, I called Uncle Daniel and told him everything. He confessed that he knew about the trust fund because Mom had put him as trustee, but that she'd made him promise not to tell me anything until the lawyer explained it to me officially. He told me that Patricia, my mom, had gone to talk to him like 2 months before she died, that she'd been very serious and determined, and that she'd told him she needed to make sure I'd be okay no matter what happened. Uncle Daniel told me that at the time, he didn't fully understand why Mom was so worried, but that now it all made sense. During the following weeks, my dad didn't stop calling me. At first, he tried to sound reasonable, saying we should talk about the house situation, that we could reach a fair agreement. But when I didn't respond the way he wanted, his tone changed. He started saying I was being selfish, that Mom wouldn't have wanted me to cause problems in the family, that Michelle and Grace needed stability. The irony of him calling me selfish when he literally kicked me out of my house to give my room to his new wife's daughter? I didn't go unnoticed, but I didn't take the bait. I just told him I needed time to think. Michelle also started contacting me, super fake text messages saying she hoped we could resolve this as a family, that she never wanted to cause problems, that please consider coming back home. As if it was still my home, as if they hadn't kicked me out. And then Grace started sending me messages too. Passive-aggressive things about how her mom was stressed because of me, about how I was being immature. I blocked her after the third message because, honestly, I didn't have the energy to deal with a 17-year-old girl's drama, who shouldn't even be involved in all this. It was my cousin Ashley, the daughter of one of my dad's cousins, who ended up revealing the final piece of the puzzle. We'd seen each other at a family gathering before Mom died, and we'd always gotten along, so I was surprised when she called me like a month after all the will drama. She told me she needed to tell me something she'd been keeping for months, that she felt guilty for not saying it before. She told me that the year before, when Mom was still alive but already very sick, she'd seen my dad with Michelle at a restaurant on the other side of town, kissing, acting like a couple. Ashley had thought about telling someone but didn't know if she'd seen right, if she should get involved, and in the end, she didn't say anything. But after the funeral, when she saw that Michelle had moved in with us so quickly, she knew what she'd seen was real. Everything clicked in that moment. The way Mom had looked at me in her last days, like wanting to tell me something, the urgency with which she'd updated her will, the specific instructions to protect my inheritance. Mom knew. She knew Dad was having an affair with Michelle. She knew he'd probably replace me quickly after her death, and she'd done everything in her power to make sure I had something no one could take from me. She'd used her last weeks of lucidity not to give up or get depressed, but to protect me from what was coming. And I'd had no idea. I confronted my dad a week later. I went to the house without warning, just when he was getting home from work. Michelle wasn't there. Grace wasn't either. I told him we needed to talk outside, in the yard, because I didn't want to have this conversation where Michelle could hear. I asked him directly, "How long were you with Michelle before Mom died?" He went pale, started stuttering, saying he didn't know what I was talking about, but I didn't let him escape. I told him someone had seen them together, that I knew the truth, that Mom probably knew it too. He broke down. Not completely, Not with tears or pleas, but his face changed, and I knew it was true. He told me he'd met Michelle at work like a year before, that at first they were just friends, but that things had become more serious when Mom was very sick. He tried to justify himself, saying it had been very difficult to watch Mom die, that he'd felt lonely, that Michelle had understood him in a way no one else had. As if having an affair while your wife is dying of cancer was forgivable because you felt lonely. I asked him if Mom knew, and he admitted he thought she did. That she'd changed with him in her last weeks. That she'd been colder, more distant, but that she'd never confronted him directly. Probably because she was busy dying and protecting her daughter instead of dealing with the drama of an unfaithful husband, I thought. But I didn't say it out loud. I told him he was pathetic, that Mom deserved something better, that I deserved something better, and that I understood perfectly why she'd made sure I had half the house. It wasn't just an inheritance. It was Mom telling my dad that he couldn't erase us completely, that I still had rights, that I was still his daughter even if he'd decided to start a new family. Michelle arrived in the middle of the conversation. We'd been talking for like half an hour, and our voices could probably be heard from the street. She came out to the yard and asked me what was going on, and I told her the truth. That I knew about the affair, that I knew it had started before Mom died, that she and my dad had lied to me about everything. She tried to deny it all at first, saying I was confused, that I was misinterpreting things, but when she saw my dad wasn't backing her up, she gave up. She told me what they had was real love, that these things happen, that I was too young to understand complicated adult situations. I told them both I wasn't going back to that house, that I didn't want anything to do with either of them. My dad tried to protest, saying I was still his daughter, that we should be able to get past this, but I was done. I told him he could keep living in the house for now, that I wasn't going to force an immediate sale because that would hurt me too, but that legally half was mine and that when I turned 21 and had full access to the trust fund Mom left me, I'd make decisions about what to do with my part of the property. And that meanwhile, he shouldn't expect me to play happy family with him, Michelle, and Grace. I blocked my dad after that. Michelle too, Grace too. Uncle Daniel supported me completely, told me I could stay with him as long as I needed, that Mom would be proud of me for standing up for my rights. Some other relatives tried to convince me to forgive my dad, that family is important, all that spiel, but most understood why I was angry, especially after word spread about the affair. Turns out not everyone thought my dad was the devastated widower he pretended to be. Now I'm back in college, focusing on my studies, working part-time to have my own money even though technically I don't need it with the trust fund waiting for me. Mom's lawyer handles everything related to the house. My dad pays all the expenses because legally he has to maintain the property, and I basically pretend that part of my life doesn't exist. From time to time, I think about Mom and how she spent her last weeks, not just dealing with the fact that she was dying, but also knowing her husband was betraying her and planning to protect me from him. I wonder if she felt lonely, if she was scared, if she wished she could talk to me about all this. A week ago, I found more photos of Mom in some boxes Uncle Daniel had saved. Photos from when she was young, before she married my dad, before cancer, before everything. She looked so happy, so full of life, and I realized I don't want to remember her just for how she was at the end, but for everything she was before. She was a strong woman who protected me even when she couldn't be here anymore, and that's what I'm going to carry with me. My dad can have his new life with Michelle and Grace. They can stay in that house pretending we're a normal family, but half of that house is mine. And every time they think about that, they're going to remember that Mom didn't let them win completely. I guess that'll have to be enough for now.